well with you. I want to kind of come live and talk a little bit about the ancient city of Kerma and Kush. So I hope that you are doing well and God bless you. And I want to say thank you, first of all, to those of you who are members. I want to say thank you. I want to also let you know that I've just released a new course. So if you are a member here on YouTube, it's only $4.99 a month. I thank you so much for supporting me. Those who are at that level and higher, the ancient history class, I am going to be releasing and putting out really essentially a library of resources that have to do with ancient Kush and ancient Kemet. And I've already launched the site. So if those of you who are members, thank you so much. You can access it. Just go to our community tab and you'll see the site there and the password to get on it. And I will be changing that from time to time until you check back frequently for that. But I want to also let you know that I just released an additional course. I released a course that really has to do with calendars and ancient Kemet. So I've talked a lot about that here, but what I've done is I've put together a mini textbook. I put together a textbook to help you understand what the seasons were in ancient Kemet and how they kind of marked the start of their new year and what did they call, how did they structure their week? How did they structure their month? How do they get to be the first in the world, if you will, to develop a 365-day calendar? And so that is available to members now. It's uploaded on the site. You can go there and take a look at it. And like I said, go to the community tab here on YouTube and you'll see the site there and you'll see the password for it, and I'll be updating that soon. But take a look at that. And these are courses that come with, I don't want to just talk to you about videos and talk to you about information. I want to come to you with content that will help you kind of make sense of it yourself, help you kind of let it seek into yourself. So that's why I'm developing a library and a set of courses that I'm offering to members on YouTube, and you can access it now. This new one about calendars, for those members that are out there, you'll see it, and you also see a video that I uploaded about it. So I want to thank you so much for your support. So God bless you. I appreciate that. So I wanted to get there and thank you for those who are considering as well. If you let me know any questions. So I want to talk a little bit about the city of Kerma. And I want to talk about ancient Kush. Ancient Kush obviously is a powerhouse. And I don't think we talk enough about ancient Kush. I think there's so much to happen in ancient Kush, and there's so much more to learn. There's so much more for me to learn. I'm here and I'm thinking about and I'm talking about, just some of the first names of ancient Kushite kings that we've seen in history. I want to mention their names today, and I want to talk about them. And I want to kind of lift them up, because as you think about it, there's some people who were significant to the development of this temple and to the city that became the capital of Kush, and to the city that was a urban area, and an area that was really a coalition of people that at times fought against ancient Kemet or just did their own thing with respect to trading and just living their own lives and their businesses. And as I think about it, there's some gentlemen who were listed as the first kings, if you will, of Kush that we know of, that we've heard about and we've spoken about and we've seen it in history. So I kind of want to touch on that today and talk a little bit about ancient Kush and Kerma, as well as the Middle Kingdom, because there's a lot that happens in the Middle Kingdom that gives us information with respect to ancient Kush. So I want to just kind of jump into it, because you've heard me talk about it before, and a lot of times you'll see archaeologists talk about the city of Kerma. And this Kerma is, as you may already know, Kerma is located right there around the third cataract of Nile, just south of the third cataract of Nile. So you look at today's Sudan, look at where Khartoum is, which is the capital, right? And you will see just above that, you'll see the sixth cataract, and you'll see the fifth cataract right there around Merowe. You kind of meander with the Nile, if you will, get to Napata, which was a significant city later on in Kush's history. And you start to get up to the third cataract, and that's where the ancient city of Kerma was. That's where the center of this urbanization, and eventually the capital of Kush, what they believe was the capital of Kush, was Kerma. And as we start to think about that, the capital of Kush, this whole area right here was Upper Nubia. And as you get above the second cataract to the first cataract, that was called Lower Nubia, because you're going from the highlands of Ethiopia, you're going down as you go out towards the Mediterranean Sea. So as time developed, as the Sahara Desert started to dry out, as the drying out that took place around 4,000 BC or thereabouts, and you had people who were all around this area that was once a grassland. The Sahara Desert was once a grassland thousands of years ago, many thousands of years ago. But as people began to move kind of inland, if you will, as the desert started drying out kind of suddenly, if you will, about 4,000 BC, you see people congregating all up and down the Nile. And people have obviously been there for thousands of years, for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, obviously, because humankind originates in Africa. But when you see that, you start to look at that. Not only did they congregate in places like Kustul and Aswan and Nekton and places in southern Kemet and up and down the Nile, if you will, up and down the Nile, even north, they congregated around the Nile in in Upper Nubia as well, in what is today the Sudan. They conquered there. So a lot of times ancient, Kemetic people will refer to things with respect to Kush, and archaeologists will refer to things with respect to Kush. A lot of times they will refer to Kerma as being the center of this urbanization area. And a lot of times they'll say that it began around 2000, 2500 BC, but actually you begin to see things much earlier than that. You can begin to see people going 5000 BC. You begin to see activity and human activity. Obviously, human activity is here, even in islands in the Nile in this area, 200,000 years ago. So they have hundreds of thousands of years of activity and human ancestral activity taking place right here, right on the Nile, in a huge island in the Nile called Sai Island. That's right here. That's taking place there. But as you kind of speed it up, you go, and we start to think about 5,000 BC, 4,000 BC, things are happening in Nubia just like they're happening in Kemet. People are gathering. People are trying to find sources of water as the desert continues to dry out, and coalitions form. Coalitions form among smaller and smaller groups that begin to develop bigger and bigger groups, and they form in various places just like they form up and down in Kemet. And you find, as we had mentioned, coalitions that are forming at Kustal, and you find the grave site at Kustal and the incense burner, the famous incense burner that's at the University of Chicago, the Kustal incense burner that had the white crown of Upper Kemet on it before in the pre-dynastic era, found right here along the border between the Sudan and today's Egypt. You find a lot of these things developing. You find all kinds of things developing in upper part of Kemet, in the southern area, and even in the north, you see things developing. But they're happening all up and down the Nile, because as you might imagine, people are trying to find water. And someone mentioned in the comments the other day that there are probably so many different artifacts and structures and buildings that were built in various places around the world. In particular in Africa, they were saying that we may not ever know of, that we may not even remember, or we may not even find, because they were built so long ago. And when I think about what makes me think about in that comment that the person made, when I look at some of the artifacts and some of the great temples that survive today that are around the area of Kerma, which we'll talk more about in just a minute, they're made of mud brick. And mud brick is like biodegradable, so this structure is thousands of years old. So it's thousands of years old. And over time, it's going to degrade. It's going to degrade, especially if you don't keep it up, right? And so imagine, we just said that human beings have been around this area for hundreds of thousands of years. They've been there for hundreds of thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. What could people have built? What type of structures? Maybe out of mud brick, because I don't know how long it would take for you to determine that the clay can pack and be hard. I would think you would determine that pretty early on and start to do things to help shelter yourself. There could have been things, there probably are structures there in ancient Kemet and in Kush, what will become Kush, that we don't even know of. That we don't even know that were so long ago. So, I got to praise God in that, because we start to think about that. That kind of makes us think about, our history goes deeper than we think. There's much more to our history than we think. And so when we start to think about Kerma, it's not just the Kerma period of 2500 BC. You're going, back 3500 BC, at least, when you start to think about some of the archaeological finds and archaeological digs and artifacts that have come up and unearthed things with respect to Kerma. Things that have been found that are, like I said, going back to 3500 BC or thereabouts. So you really end up having in ancient Kerma, and even in what they call a pre-Kerma era, you begin to have 1,000 years of history from about 3500 to 2500 BC, where there's activity, there's human urban activity in this area, or right around the third cataract of the Nile, when what we call Kerma, and that's what we call it today. And we don't know what they called it back then. We know that there's activity thousands of years ago. 3500 BC is around the same time, obviously, as pre-dynastic Kemet. This is as Kemet was forming. Things were also forming in an urban standpoint. And let's be real, let's get it straight. They were probably forming and reforming up and down this place for many years before this, right? Prior to this. But when we think about 3500 BC, 3800 BC, we're talking about a time that's pre-dynastic Kemet. But people are there. People are not doing things because of it's not the dynastic era in Kemet. A lot of times we like to think of, there's this line kind of drawn in the sand, no pun intended, line drawn in the sand. If you go, literally, where things must not have happened in this part of Africa until there was a dynasty, until there was Dynasty 0 or Dynasty 1. And that's just not true. That's just not the way things happen. People are going about their business, living their day-to-day lives, and are not waiting for the dynasties to develop in ancient Kemet for them to be doing stuff. It's not like people started walking when the dynastic era started. People were there. And even, we talked about this, and I had this in my first course for members. I have this, how did Kemet get started? Even the dynastic culture that came out of Nekton and that whole area in Upper Kemet, even that dynastic culture was really a blend of the pre-dynastic culture that was there, that was in Nekton. I mean, they say that, the archaeologists say that they found, and I have some documentation and references to that if you want to read it in that course, but in a textbook for the course, because I also include textbooks in the course so that you can read it and download it. But they mention that the development of the iconography and all of the symbols, if you will, that was ancient Kemet, that would make up ancient Kemet beliefs and cultures, that in culture, it was there. Those things were in place. Many of those things, like the falcon deity and worship of Peru and various things, were in place before Dynasty 0, if you will. And it was just a blend. They saw no distinct change between the pre-dynastic culture and the dynastic culture. As a matter of fact, they just renamed it. That's literally what they say. They just renamed it from calling it Nekton or calling it Nakada or Nakeda. They just renamed it from calling it that and just calling it dynastic era when they had a succession of kings that lasted long enough. It wasn't a change in culture. It was literally just a change in rulership that lasted for a period of time. But the culture, the artifacts, no difference. There literally is a culture developing in Upper Kemet and up and down the Nile that's growing out of native people that were there. And it's happening in Kemet, 3500 BC, and it's happening in Kerma. It's happening in what will become Kush. So it's happening in this area around the third cataract of the Nile. And one of the things that's kind of different and somewhat, difficult about just the Nile and with respect to ancient Kemet and various aspects of that, it's a respect to the Nile, and the Nile being really something that's pretty rocky. So you think about the cataracts of the Nile, you think about what it takes to kind of go up and down the Nile, you kind of think about that. The area in the Nile going from the sixth cataract up to the first cataract, those are all very rocky areas that it is difficult to navigate. They're very difficult to get around. It's difficult to navigate. And when you think about that, you start to kind of put some perspective on that. That whole era was right there. So when you think about Nubia, this sixth cataract, fifth cataract, fourth cataract, this is all Nubia. This is all Upper Nubia, the southern part of Nubia, if you will. This is all there. The cataracts are not like 2 miles long. They're not like a mile long or a half mile. These are cataracts, rocky areas, major rocky areas are going for miles, maybe 40 miles. So like long periods of time, long stretches of land, if you will. And it makes it, the challenges, the difference in traveling up and down the Nile in this part, uninhabited, unimpeded, being able to flow with the flow of the Nile that's going from south to north, just kind of getting in your boat and letting your boat take you. And the winds, by the way, prevailed in the opposite direction. So you could put up sails and go in the opposite direction. Well, if you were in Nubia, especially, 3,500 years BC, you are going and challenging and navigating very, very rocky areas, and you are going up and down this area. So you become a significant point in terms of trade. You're taking in trade from places farther south in Africa, and you're being kind of like a central point where that's flowing into the Nile Valley, probably going out towards what will become Punt, or what was Punt, in the Mediterranean and various places. We know that there was a larger trade network taking place in this whole area, and outside of this area, beyond just the Nile Valley, thousands of years BC, thousands of years before Christ, this trade was there. And Kerma was a significant city, a significant trading point in that traffic that would go up and down. But you might imagine there is some natural barriers that are going to be there if you have these major rocky areas in the southern part and what will be Nubia. And what's interesting, once you get past the first cataract, which was the natural southern border of ancient Kemet, it's smooth sailing. You can literally go from the first cataract, beyond that, north of that, and all the way out to the Mediterranean Sea. You get in your boat and you can go, and the current will take you. And if you put your boat in the other way, you put up sails and you go back the same direction. So in the opposite direction. So when you think about it, the Kemetic people in the country that would become Kemet had a highway, a watery highway that had some advantages to it, that it could travel unimpeded for miles and miles all the way out to the Mediterranean Sea without these major rocky areas. But Nubia and what would become Kush had to navigate these. And so that made it a little bit of a challenge, but it didn't stop them from having coalitions. It didn't stop them from having different people, because we know as ancient Nubia developed, you have, and things went on as time went on, 2500 BC and so forth, you end up seeing the Medjay and you see the Urjet, you see the Wawet, all here in lower Nubia. And you begin to also see people continue to develop what will become the city of Kerma and what would eventually become Kush. So as we're looking at that, we kind of jump in. God bless you. Thank you so much. You remember in ancient Kemet so much. Thank you. Uganda's where the Nile River begins in the south. So when you're thinking about, when you think about the White Nile, you're talking about Tanzania and Uganda and Kenya and very important. So thank you so much. God bless you. To all of you, Nubian Messiah and CC Mac. C-Mac, I thank you very much. God bless you. Hope that you are doing well. God bless you, Mr. Smith. I hope you're doing a good job here today. So as we think about that, we are talking about a situation where trade is going on in Nubia. It's not just, nothing happening in Nubia. It's not that. When you look at all the records that you can see, artifacts from Kemet, beyond Kemet, north of Kemet, in this whole area, it's clear that there are goods moving up and down here. And one of the significant things that takes place in this whole area is that you find that there is all kinds of things like ivory and ostrich eggs and ostrich feathers and gold. Obviously, Nubia is known for gold, as well as exotic animals that will be traded up and down. You have all these different diorites, certain precious stones are going up and down Nubia, precious minerals, as well as incense and things like that. Just like they got from Punt, which is also south and farther south, you find that this is all taking place in this area, and it becomes an area that's sought after. Now, what you see right here is King Senwosret III. He is a king from the Middle Kingdom. So he would have been around 2000 BC or a little bit, after that. He would have been in the Middle Kingdom. He was a powerful king. And in the Middle Kingdom, one of the things that tells you about the history of Kush, because this whole area that we're talking about in Kush, Kerma is significant, 3500 BC, and it lasts for 1,000 years in the pre-Kerma period, if you will, 1,000 years, 3,500 to about 2,500 BC. You're having a culture, you're having people there, they're trading, they're doing their own thing, and they're deciding how they want their societies set up. I don't think we need to be judgmental to people because they have different types of societies. People have all kinds of ways and all kinds of difficulties that they work through when they develop their societies. Just look at us today. Look at us trying to keep our societies together and develop new ones and change parts of our societies, how difficult that is. Imagine what it's like, thousands of years ago as people are doing this in much rougher conditions, so to speak, just naturally speaking, from a nature standpoint. And so you have a lot of groups that develop, and you will often see as Kush begins to be mentioned in Kemetic literature. And the first time we hear it mentioned is at one of the forts that's developed in the Middle Kingdom that Kemetic people developed to really arm themselves against Kush, right? You hear them say Kush. When they talk about Kush, as you get into 2000 BC and 2500 BC and beyond, and so you start to get into the Middle Kingdom, they talk about Kush a lot of times as a part of like a coalition. You will see them mention the name Kush, and they will mention Kush, and then they will mention other peoples after them. They mention names of other people, other coalitions. So it appears that it wasn't just Kush in this area, because this is a vast area. I mean, this is a lot of times when we talk about the Nile Valley, we're talking about that part that's hugging the Nile and the areas right on the immediate left and right, if you will, east and west of the Nile. I mean, that's the Nile Valley. You get farther out, you're talking about other areas that wasn't necessarily Kemet, and that wasn't necessarily Kush when you got far out. You had other people there, and you had people vying for control of these key ports. And they had ports, literally ports, where boats were parked, vying for control of these key ports where trade was going up and down, where you had gold and monkeys and ivory and ebony going up and down. People were vying for control of that. And so you end up having not just Kush yourself, there are other people there. So as you start to get into the Middle Kingdom, you will find that Middle Kingdom rulers of ancient Kemet, and this was one of them, this brother here was a ruler during the Middle Kingdom. He and other people set up forts. They set up forts right there around the second cataract of the Nile to really start to probably send a message to ancient Kush. I mean, a lot of times we think about it from just one perspective, but they're controlling a lot of resources and a lot of goods. And at times there were many periods of years where ancient Kemet did nothing here but trade, right? And there were times where they fought. There were times when they set up forts. And there were times when they were sending a message to ancient Kush. And this middle kingdom was one of the times where they set up a series of forts right here around the Second Cataract, right there. And they're basically telling, the people of Kush, hey, stop. We're going to control this traffic. If you're trying to trade and you're coming from the south, you need to get out of your boats. Get out of your boat. Check in at this fort. You're not going past us unless you are checking in with us, and you're going to have to, deboard and follow our rules if you plan on going up and down this watery highway past a certain point. And they were really facing their forts toward the south because there was a coalition of people. There were significant people there. And as you start to see some of the people mentioned, I want to shout out the brothers' names, so to speak. I don't want to just I want to shout out the brothers' names. There are people that are mentioned that are part of ancient Kush. And some of the first ones we see, some of the first kings of ancient Kush are called Awawa, which I just love that name. Awawa, I love that name. And they have these excretation artifacts, if you will. There were times where they were artifacts that they had that they would maybe put the name of a ruler on it, or somebody else, but in this case, put the name of a ruler on it, and it may be that ruler, and they would also mention that ruler's parents, mother and father, and they might smash it and break it in some way so as to say, hey, we're going to smash this ruler and destroy him. But you have several texts that date back apparently to the Middle Kingdom, to this time period where they mention kings of Kush, and they mention a whole series of people. And one of the people they mentioned, and appear to maybe mention twice, is Awawa, and he is the son of, and they say Kabun. They mention his mother's name. The father's name was broken and kind of scratched out, but they would say Awawa, the son of. And they would name his mother and father. And when you start to think about that, stop for a second. If you're in ancient Kemet thousands of years ago and you were talking about Kush and you are naming the king of Kush and you name his mother and father, you must know them. I mean, you must know something about them. Like, how do you know who their parents are? You know what I'm saying? How are you that in touch with somebody who is farther to yourself, who you may not respect? That's what they want to say, so-called not respect. And you know their mother and father's name. And you're calling them mothers and fathers. I mean, I can even say maybe one of the parents, but actually, God bless you. Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. Thank you so much. God bless you. How do you know their names? They literally mention their names and they mention their mother and father. So I want to just shout him out today. Awawa, I love that name. He is the king of Kush, an ancient king of Kush, listed on one of the artifacts from the Middle Kingdom as being a king of Kush. From I want to say it may have been one of the artifacts near Buhin, which is one of the forts there. And I'm going to be doing more digging and resources and sharing that with you so you can see it yourself, so you can read more about it yourself. Because I want to find even more about him as much as I can about him. They talk about Awawa and they talk about his mother. And they talk about Eutachresis, and they mention his mother and father. They mention Nedja, and they're literally talking about ancient Kemetic people making calling the names of Kushite kings, and they list a whole bunch of them and calling their mothers and fathers' names. I mean, that tells you something that they must have known him. They must have known something about him. It wasn't just a king who was far off, who had no power, or not someone you pay attention to. You know, their mother and father. That must have been something that went up and down the Nile valleys. Some kind of internet highway, if you will, of information where you would find out this man's his mother and father's name. And call them out on an artifact as part of what you're doing. So you start to think about, there must have been a slightly different relationship. And I just wanted to stop. I mean, I wanted to make part of this conversation about these men. Make part of the conversation to call their names, to put their names in front of you, to ask you to do research. Maybe you can find out additional stuff about them and we can share it in the chat below. Let's raise him up. Nedja, who is Nedja? What can we find out about him? How can we talk about his name? How can we talk about his mother and his father? How can we talk about what happened during his day? We're going to find this out. I'm going to find out as much as I can and share it with you. What about Eutachresis? What about him and what about his family? And what do we know about happening in ancient Kush at that time? And Awawa, whose name I love, who apparently might have been mentioned twice. And so as they start to talk about this, the first two might have been a part of a succession of a dynasty in ancient Kush long time ago, long before the so-called 25th dynasty in 900 BC, long before that. Well over 1,000 years before that, these may be people who were kings of Kush. And so if you find out information, let me know. I'm going to be digging more and sharing more about it, but I want to lift their names up today, especially Awawa. I like that. You'll probably hear me say that, several times. So as we start to look at this, we know that these people, Awawa, Eutachresis, as well as Nedja, that they are people who are a part of ancient Kush's history many thousands of years ago, before the second rise of Kush, before the new kingdom takes them over, long before that, they are powerful. They are powerhouses. And they're in this part of Upper Nubia, in there around Kerma, and they're trading things. They have goods, and they have a whole collection of people who are with them, and a coalition of other peoples who are with them. And they're running a network of goods and trades up and down the Nile Valley. They are being a conduit between things that are coming from the north, coming into the south, as well as things that are coming from the south, going into the north. That's really feeding into the religious system and the temple system that was developed in ancient Kemet. Some of the things you see in the old kingdom, even in the pyramids in the north, are coming from places farther south than Nubia. Some of the diorite statues that you see of the famous old kingdom kings, that's coming from precious stone and precious resources that are from Nubia way farther south, even farther south than Nubia, farther south in Africa. This is a trade that's taking place, and these young men from ancient Kush are helping to develop that. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. I'm going to be doing more about this. I'd love to hear what you see about them, what you learn about them, what you think about them. Let's talk more about them. Let's kind of get an appreciation for, as we talk about Kush over the next several sessions, what was happening in the kingdom of Kush and what it ended up becoming. Because we can talk about Kush, lasting as a part of the new kingdom, being able to revive itself after the new kingdom, having to develop the so-called 25th dynasty, King Pianki and Alara and Kashta, all the way into Queen Amanirenas, as we talked about the other day, all the way into 30 BC and well into 300 in the Common Era. This is the kingdom of Kush. So I wanted to remember them today. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.